Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. New York shone like a sparkling jewel that evening. In the majestic lobby of the Hotel Sterling Grand, the city's most influential guests flocked, dressed in their finest attire. Crystal chandeliers, red carpets, and background music created an atmosphere of absolute luxury. At the center of this theater of power and appearance stood Ethan Caldwell, a young millionaire heir, self-confident and charming, but arrogant and cruel towards those he considered inferior to his rank. His gaze fell on Isabella Harper, the legendary pianist, entered with an elegance and poise few could match. Rumors had circulated. Isabella was no longer the virtuoso she once was, her career ruined by a jealous and treacherous patron. But Ethan, convinced he could humiliate anyone to impress his guests, saw no danger. In a condescending tone, he declared before the entire assembly, "If you want my attention, Isabella, you'll have to play now." A heavy silence fell. The guests held their breath. Some murmured, others smiled nervously, anticipating the pianist's supposed failure. Isabella, however, remained perfectly calm. Her eyes reflected both the pain of a stolen past and the flame of revenge she had been nurturing for 10 years. At that precise moment, no one knew that this gala would mark the beginning of a lesson in humility for Ethan and a rebirth for Isabella. For behind her fragile exterior, she hid an intact talent and an implacable determination. The great hall of the Sterling Grand was bathed in warm light, reflected off the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The guests, dressed in long gowns and impeccable suits, whispered among themselves, some casting admiring glances toward the center stage. At the center of attention was Ethan Caldwell, smiling confidently, savoring every glance that landed on him. For him, this gala was not only an opportunity to shine in society, but a playground for his arrogance. Then she entered. Isabella Harper, the legendary pianist, walked gracefully, her steps measured, her black dress emphasizing her elegant figure. The whispers turned to a respectful silence. Everyone knew who she was, and yet Ethan smiled condescendingly. Approaching her, he declared loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Isabella Harper, you know, everyone says your talent has faded. But if you want my attention tonight, you'll have to play for me. Now." The silence grew even more intense. Some of the guests tensed, curious to see what the great pianist would do next. Isabella said nothing. Her gaze pierced Ethan, and behind the apparent calm, a cold anger burned. She took a step toward the piano, but suddenly stopped. Ethan confidently crossed his arms and smirked. "Go ahead, impress us, or admit you're not the pianist you used to be." The guests' muffled laughter reinforced the humiliation. Isabella, however, did not relent. Her hands clenched slightly, but her face remained impassive. She knew this moment would not be a defeat, but the prelude to a revenge carefully orchestrated for years. Without a word, she turned and left the stage, leaving Ethan and the crowd stunned. Murmurs rose. How could she just leave like that? Ethan, however, smiled, certain he had won the duel. Little did he know that beneath that apparent passivity lay the preparation for a moment that would make him regret his condescension. This gala wasn't just a social gathering. It was the beginning of a confrontation between arrogance and talent, between humiliation and justice. And Isabella Harper, a pianist betrayed but never broken, was ready to write her revenge, note by note. The tension in the room was palpable. The guests held their breath, waiting for the show Ethan had promised. Isabella, calm and dignified, walked back to the piano. Her eyes met Ethan's, and in that gaze, there was a silent promise. He would soon understand that he had underestimated someone far more powerful than him, but not yet. Ethan, ever so sure of himself, leaned slightly towards her and whispered, just loud enough for some of the guests to hear, "Come on, everyone says you don't play like you used to, show us you can still impress." A murmur rippled through the room. A few guests grinned mischievously, anticipating Isabella's humiliating failure. But Isabella didn't move. She simply placed her hands on the keyboard and breathed deeply, as if preparing for a silent confrontation. Then, in an impulsive and cruel gesture, Ethan raised his hand and, in front of everyone, lightly slapped Isabella's cheek. Not a real violent slap, but enough to make the humiliation public. The soft but distinct sound startled several guests. Some stood up in shock, while an awkward silence fell over the room. Isabella took a step back, but her face betrayed neither anger nor pain. She closed her eyes for a moment, catching her breath, then made an elegant gesture. "I prefer to withdraw," she said calmly, her clear, sharp voice echoing around the room. She left the stage with the same dignity she had displayed when she entered, leaving Ethan frozen, red with frustration and shame. The murmurs turned to whispers. Some of the guests were beginning to understand that the pianist was not just an easy target. Ethan, furious, straightened up and tried to hide his confusion behind a forced smile. He didn't yet know that this humiliation, which he thought was complete, was only the spark that would ignite Isabella's masterful revenge. For beneath this apparent calm, she was planning every detail, every note, every movement, ready to transform this humiliation into a resounding triumph. And as she disappeared behind the stage doors, one word echoed in her head: revenge. Back in her elegant but discreet Manhattan apartment, Isabella Harper quietly closed the door behind her. The noise and luxury of the gala suddenly seemed far away. Alone in her silent room, she dropped her coat and sat on the edge of the sofa. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from an anger pent up for 10 long years. At his side stood Marcus Bennett, her assistant and loyal friend for years, who had seen Isabella at her peak and at her lowest. "Are you sure you want to come back for them?" he asked cautiously. Isabella looked him straight in the eyes. "It's not for them. It's for me. To show that what I've lost, I can find and overcome. And most of all," she lowered her voice slightly, "to show him, Ethan, that I'm not to be trifled with." Marcus nodded. He knew she wasn't just talking about music, but about personal justice. Together, they began to develop a plan. Isabella would create a unique performance, blending technical virtuosity and raw emotion, a piece capable of captivating and surprising the audience. Every note had to be perfect, every gesture calculated. For days, Isabella practiced tirelessly. Her fingers glided over the piano keys as if rediscovering their lost youth. Each piece she played became more intense, more profound. Marcus, observing closely, noted every detail, suggesting nuances to accentuate the emotion and impact. But the preparation wasn't limited to the piano. Isabella studied Ethan. She analyzed his reactions, his arrogance, his gestures, and anticipated how he would react at each moment of his performance. She knew exactly which notes and silences would shake his confidence. One evening, as rain fell on the apartment windows, Isabella paused for a moment and looked at her hands. 10 years of waiting for this moment, she whispered. Her eyes shone with icy determination. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're ready. When you go on stage, no one, not even Ethan, will know what's going to happen to them." And Isabella smiled silently. This wasn't just a return. It was a rebirth. And every note she played would be the silent answer to all the humiliations she'd suffered. The countdown to the next gala had begun, and this time, she would leave no room for Ethan Caldwell's arrogance. Evening was falling over Manhattan, and Isabella Harper sat down at her piano in her silent apartment. The black and white keys reflected the painful memories that had marked her career. She remembered perfectly Richard Vaughan, her mentor and friend, a legendary pianist who had believed in her from the very beginning. It was he who had encouraged Isabella to play with passion, to express every emotion in her pieces. But everything had changed 10 years earlier. An influential patron, jealous of her talent and hungry for control, had sabotaged her career. Cancelled concerts, unfair reviews, and terminated contracts. Isabella's reputation had been ruined overnight. She had been publicly humiliated, betrayed by those she trusted, and forced to disappear from the music world for years. Sitting at the piano, Isabella let her fingers brush over the keys. Memories of that betrayal mingled with the melody she was beginning to create. Each note she played told her story: pain, anger, but also the determination to be reborn. Marcus watched silently, aware that these memories fueled his friend's strength. "You know that tonight, at the gala," he said softly, "you're going to turn that anger into art. No one will be able to ignore it." Isabella nodded. "This isn't just for me. This is for everyone who tried to silence me. Tonight, I'm going to show them that my talent never faded, it only matured." She also remembered the condescending looks of some critics, the quiet laughter behind her back, the way Ethan Caldwell, that arrogant young heir, had tried to belittle her. All of this would now serve as fuel for her performance. Each rehearsal was a battle against time and fatigue, but Isabella felt her power returning. She wasn't just preparing a performance, she was sculpting the perfect revenge. Her plan wasn't just to perform, but to reverse the humiliation she had suffered, to reclaim her reputation, and to remind the world that true talent can never be destroyed by arrogance or injustice. As night drew on, Isabella stood and stared out the window at the illuminated city. A cold determination shone in her eyes. The next gala would be the moment when past and present collided. And this time, the humiliated pianist would once again become the woman everyone should admire and respect. The next gala was fast approaching, and the excitement in the New York art world was palpable. Invitations were circulating like trophies, and all eyes were on the Sterling Grand, where Isabella Harper would appear again. But this time, the tension didn't just come from the music, it came from Ethan Caldwell, who had decided to transform his arrogance into a public bet. In an exclusive interview with a Society magazine, Ethan said with a condescending smile, "Isabella Harper claims she can play like she used to, but I bet that's just a myth. If she can impress me tonight, well, I'll marry her." The press immediately seized on the news. The magazine published the article with a provocative headline: "Ethan Caldwell's musical challenge, can a pianist really seduce him with her talent?" Social media exploded. Some guests laughed, others were outraged. But Isabella, hearing the news from Marcus, showed no visible anger. "Did you hear that?" Marcus asked, smirking. "Yes," Isabella replied calmly. "He just sealed his own failure." For her, Ethan's public gamble was a monumental strategic error. Not only did he underestimate her, but he also exposed his arrogance to the entire audience, ensuring that his own humiliation would be public. Isabella smiled inwardly. Every word Ethan said fueled the dramatic tension that would make his performance even more powerful. For several days, Isabella worked more intensely than ever. Every note, every pause, every crescendo of her performance was carefully crafted to maximize the effect on Ethan and the audience. She knew exactly which moments would captivate attention, which passages would shake his confidence, and which silences would provoke unbearable tension. Marcus watched her rehearse, admiring her discipline. "No one has ever seen someone prepare for revenge like this." Isabella nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "It's not just a musical challenge. It's a lesson for him and for anyone who thinks they can judge or humiliate real talent." The day of the gala arrived. Isabella entered the stage with grace and poise. Whispers rose, everyone knew Ethan had made a ridiculous bet, and everyone was waiting for the showdown. But what they didn't know was that the pianist was no longer just the humiliated musician she once was. She had become an indomitable force, ready to transform the entire room into witnesses to her revenge. In the days leading up to the gala, Isabella Harper's apartment felt more like a private concert hall than a living space. The walls were covered with annotated sheet music, every musical note highlighted, every nuance meticulously studied. The light from the piano lamps illuminated her nimble fingers, which glided over the keys with perfect precision. Marcus, his faithful assistant and confidant, watched silently. He knew the weight of anger and vengeance behind every note. "You outdo yourself with every rehearsal," he said finally. Isabella nodded without looking away from the keyboard. "Every finger, every rest, every crescendo has to be perfect. It's not just about playing. It's about telling our story, about showing that I've never been broken." She rehearsed for hours, sometimes until her fingers ached, sometimes until she was exhausted. But with every fall, she got back up more determined. Every note she played transformed her anger and pain into pure energy, a palpable emotion that would soon pervade the gala. Marcus also reminded her that Ethan Caldwell wouldn't just be a spectator, he'd be an unwitting participant in her revenge. Isabella had to anticipate his reactions, his nervous laughter, his arrogant gestures. She visualized her audience, their expressions, every glance, every held breath. Every movement on the piano became calculated to create maximum dramatic effect. The days passed, marked by discipline and concentration. Isabella rose early, rehearsed until evening, then revised every bar of the piece she had composed especially for this gala. Her piano resonated like a silent battlefield, each note a weapon against past humiliation and against Ethan, the arrogant heir. One night, as rain fell on Manhattan, Isabella finally stopped and placed her hands on her knees. "It's ready," she whispered. Marcus smiled, impressed by her determination. Ready to surprise them. Ready to humiliate them, or rather, to make them understand what real talent is. Isabella looked up at the window, taking in the city before her. This performance would be her triumph, her rebirth. The countdown was ending, and soon the whole world, including Ethan Caldwell, would discover that a betrayed artist can come back stronger and more invincible than ever. The big night had finally arrived, sterling grand the night was shining brightly, and the gala room was filled with select guests. The crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections on excited and curious faces. Everyone knew the rumor: Ethan Caldwell had publicly bet that Isabella Harper wouldn't be able to perform like she used to. The anticipation was palpable. Isabella entered. Silence fell immediately. Her flowing black dress swayed with each step, her perfectly coiffed hair framing a calm but determined face. The murmurs died down when her eyes met Ethan's, sitting in the front row with a confident, arrogant smile. But that smile wavered slightly when he realized the quiet strength emanating from her. She sat down at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. The first note resonated through the room, clear and pure, immediately capturing everyone's attention. Each note that followed was perfectly controlled, each crescendo conveying raw emotion. The audience was mesmerized. Ethan felt his confidence waver. He'd thought Isabella would be intimidated by the gala, that she'd be fragile or hesitant. But what he saw disarmed him. Her virtuosity was intact, more powerful than he'd ever seen it. Every note seemed to tell a story: betrayal, humiliation, anger, and most of all, Isabella Harper's rebirth. The guests held their breath. Some were moved to tears, others stunned. Every silence between the notes was calculated to heighten the dramatic effect. Isabella wasn't just playing for them, she was playing for herself, for her stolen career, and to show Ethan that arrogance couldn't overcome true talent. As the play progressed, Ethan felt the gamble he'd made backfire. His initial confidence eroded, replaced by shock and shame. Isabella, focused, captured every look, every reaction, and ensured her silent revenge reached its peak. When the last note died away, a tense silence reigned for a few seconds. Then, a resounding ovation filled the room. The applause, the cries of admiration, and the cheers left no doubt: Isabella Harper had triumphed. Ethan, flushed with confusion and humiliation, stood slowly, unable to smile. He had bet and lost publicly. Isabella, serene, stood in turn and offered a small smile, a smile charged with meaning. She had regained control, and her victory was complete. The final chord echoed through the room, and a suspended silence fell before the ovation erupted. The guests rose to their feet, applauding enthusiastically, some clapping their hands until they ached. Isabella Harper, tall and majestic, let the sound die down and turned her gaze to Ethan Caldwell. He stood frozen, his face pale, unable to hide his astonishment. His arrogance had crumbled in a matter of minutes. Everyone had seen. Everyone had understood. The young heir had tried to humiliate a virtuoso, and the lesson had come back to him with an intensity he had never imagined. Ethan tried to smile, to appear detached, but the slight tremor of his jaw betrayed his shame. The guests whispered behind him, some exchanging knowing glances: the ridiculous bet, the condescension, all of it had just backfired on him in a big way. Isabella stepped forward gracefully, her measured steps echoing on the gala floor. She stopped in front of Ethan and, in a calm but sharp voice, whispered, "You challenged me, and you lost." The whisper of his words traveled through the room, capturing everyone's attention. Every guest understood the significance of that simple sentence. The humiliation Ethan had sought to inflict was now theirs. Ethan looked down, unable to answer. Silence and admiration for Isabella made his own arrogance seem ridiculous. He had underestimated her talent, her discipline, and her determination. And now he was witnessing a lesson he would never forget: true greatness is not measured by money or audacity, but by talent, integrity, and dignity. The guests continued to applaud, some leaning forward to compliment Isabella, while Ethan remained motionless, finally understanding the magnitude of his defeat. Isabella, proud and serene, made a small gesture of salute, then left the stage, leaving behind a humiliated young man and an amazed audience. This evening would not only be one of musical triumph, but one of revenge accomplished, dignity restored, and a lesson in humility that would mark Ethan Caldwell forever. The gala was now in its final stages. The applause still resonated, and the guests continued to turn to Isabella Harper, fascinated by her undiminished talent and perfect command of the stage. Ethan Caldwell, meanwhile, remained frozen in the front row, unable to find the words to react. His ridiculous bet had been shattered in public, and with it, all his arrogance. Isabella approached him, each step measured, each movement imbued with calm and dignity. Her voice, soft but firm, carried through the room. "Ethan, you bet on me. You said if I played perfectly, you'd marry me." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "But what you didn't understand is that love isn't won by a bet or by arrogance." The entire room held its breath. Ethan looked down, shame and humiliation mingling with a strange admiration he dared not express. Isabella continued. "Tonight, I played for myself, for my career, for my dignity. This bet was only worth something to you, and you just lost." The guests erupted in murmurs of admiration. Some praised her intelligence and strength, others praised the precision of her musical performance. Isabella Harper had transformed an act of arrogance into a masterful lesson in the value of respect and personal pride. Ethan, overwhelmed, tried to whisper something, but no words came out. He had underestimated Isabella. He had believed that a pianist could be intimidated by her reputation alone. But he had forgotten that true talent, combined with determination and self-control, is capable of overturning any arrogance. Isabella, with a final smile of serenity, turned to the audience and gave a slight bow. The applause redoubled. This moment was not only her victory over Ethan Caldwell, but the triumph of an unjustly shattered career, of a humiliated artist who had just regained her place and reminded the entire world that dignity and talent always surpass arrogance and petty games. Night had fallen on Manhattan, but the sterling grand continued to shine in the spotlight, as if the city itself were celebrating Isabella Harper's triumph. The guests, still reeling from the performance, slowly left the room, their conversations punctuated with praise and admiration. Everywhere, Isabella's name was whispered with awe and wonder. Isabella, standing in the wings, breathed deeply. Every note played, every calculated silence, every controlled gesture had been perfect. Her revenge had been accomplished, but more than that, she had regained her dignity, her passion, and the recognition that had been unjustly stolen from her. Marcus approached, a wide smile on his face. "You did it. You conquered the stage and put Ethan, well, in his place." Isabella smiled, but her eyes shone with something deeper. "It's not just him. It's for all the wasted years, for every person who doubted me. Tonight, I'm back to myself." Ethan Caldwell, humiliated but now aware of his arrogance, slowly stood up and met her gaze again. This time, there was no challenge, no provocation. He simply nodded, a silent gesture of respect mixed with shame. He had understood that true greatness cannot be bought, commanded, or controlled through manipulation or wealth. The next day, the New York newspapers headlined, "Isabella Harper, the pianist who regained her glory and put arrogance in its place." Social media was flooded with videos and testimonies from moved spectators. Isabella knew her career was being reborn, but this rebirth went far beyond music. She had proven that dignity and talent always surpass arrogance and condescension. A few days later, Isabella received invitations to perform internationally. She smiled as she read the messages. Finally, she could rebuild her career at her own pace, according to her own rules, free from any past humiliation. And somewhere along the way, Ethan Caldwell, now more humble and thoughtful, remembered an unforgettable lesson: underestimating someone for their looks or reputation can lead to a public and crushing defeat. Isabella Harper, for her part, had rediscovered much more than her music. She had rediscovered her strength, her passion, and her freedom. Her rebirth was not just that of an artist, but that of a woman who dared to transform pain and humiliation into triumph and art. And so she marched into the future, brighter and more invincible than ever, ready to conquer the world, note by note.